Hey, this is Donna with Sparrowstudios7, bringing to you I Read and I Learn, the commentary on Genesis 16. So I'm going to go through verse by verse, and then I have time at the end. I'll give you some paragraphs specifically about Hagar. I may have to do another video, but that's what we're doing tonight, just so you know. Alright, so Genesis 16. The first note covers verses 1 through 16. While waiting for their promised son to be born, Abram and Sarai attempted an ultimate plan that was not keeping with faith. 16, 1 through 3, this is the note. Abram and Sarai faced the tension of her being barren and beyond childbearing years. By custom, a barren woman could give her servant to her husband as a slave wife. A child born to that union was considered the wife's child and could be adopted as the heir. Sarai's suggestion, unobjectionable by custom, set a problematic human plan in motion. God's promises would be fulfilled by faith. Verses 4 through 6. Perhaps Hagar expected to become the favored wife instead of Sarai. So this note refers specifically to Hagar began to despise or treat her mistress Sarai with contempt. So it's not too far-fetched that, like the note says, that because she bore a son for Abram after Sarai being barren for so long, that she would become the favored wife instead of Sarai. Now, obviously that didn't happen, but I can see why they put the note in there. Verse 16:7, the angel of the Lord was the Lord himself. And I forgot. In the previous note, it also notes that in Proverbs 30, 21 through 23, it gives more credence to why that note may have been a thing, may have been valid. So, moving on to the angel of the Lord in verse 7. We see it happening, the angel of the Lord mentioned in Genesis 16:13. We'll see it again in 21:17, 22:11 through 12, Genesis 31:11 through 13, 48:16, Exodus 3:2, Exodus 32:34, Judges 6:11, 16:22, and Judges chapter 13, verses 22 and 33, and Zechariah 3:1 through 2. Yes, Sweeney. But was also distinct from the Lord. So the angel of the Lord seen here was the Lord, but was distinct from a different Lord mentioned and talked about later on in Genesis. So Genesis 24:7, 2 Samuel 24:16, and Zechariah 1:2. The angel of the Lord is probably theophany, spelled Theophany, or a manifestation of God, or Christophany, an appearance of the pre-incarnate Messiah. We'll see this mentioned in Genesis 18:1 through 2, 19:1, Numbers 22:22, Judges 2:1 through 4, and 5:23, Zechariah 12:8, and this Christophany speaking with the authority of the Lord himself. Okay, so that explains a little bit more about the angel of the Lord and how it's a little bit different from the Lord himself. Verses 8 through 12 says this. The angel's rhetorical questions encouraged Hagar to pour out her heart to God. When she did, God commanded her to return and submit. We see this in verse 9 where it says, The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority," promising that her son, yes, Beanie, that her son would have innumerable descendants. The angel of the Lord never referred to Hagar as Abram's wife, only as Sarai's servant. She would have Abram's child, but Ishmael was not central to God's covenant with Abram. And then it goes on specifically about 10 through 12. Hagar's son would be the father of a great but wild and hostile nation living in the Arabian desert as perennial enemies of Israel. We'll see this talked about again in Genesis 25:18. God blessed Ishmael as Abram's descendant, but not as the line chosen to carry on the covenant. That blessing was reserved for Abram's chosen heir. And then, specifically about verse 11, names in Genesis often capture the message of a passage and aid the remembrance of events and their significance in the history of faith. The name Ishmael, which means God hears. Yes, you're going to have to bring it over here. Thank you. Commemorates that the Lord heard Hagar's cry of distress. We will also read the note on 14:15 about this. This name would have greatly comforted Hagar. God listened to her prayers and acknowledged her complaint. The note about verse 13 says, Hagar responded to God's messages by faith. In her words and in her obedience, the God who sees me, God knew Hagar's plight and watched over her. 16, and then we'll talk about 16:14 through 15. So the names Be'er Lahai Roy, which means well of the living one who sees me, and Ishmael, mentioned in verse 16, verse 11, were a message and a rebuke for Abram and Sarai. God sees the affliction and hears the cries of those in need. Sarai and Abram should have prayed rather than taking the fulfillment of the promise into their own hands by following social custom. We'll see this as well. Giving children to the barren woman is God's work. We'll see this in Psalms 113:9 and also in 1 Samuel 1 through 28 and Luke 1 through 25. Resolved by human intervention. The Lord hears the afflicted, sees them in their need, and will miraculously provide for them. So, now I'm going to read part of what Hagar being a servant seen by God. Hagar was the Egyptian servant of Sarai, Abram's wife. When God commanded Abram to leave Mesopotamia, he promised him a multitude of descendants who would be given a new land. We saw this in Genesis 12:2, verses 2 and 7. After 10 childless years in Canaan, Sarai followed the customary Mesopotamian strategy of giving Hagar to Abram as his concubine. Any son born of the union of husband and concubine was considered the wife's child. We'll see this also in Genesis 30, verses 1 through 6. Hagar became so disrespectful to Sarai during her pregnancy that Sarai dealt harshly with her and Hagar fled into the desert. The angel of the Lord appeared to Sarai. Hagar bore a son, Ishmael, when Abram was 86 years old. I'll be back in a moment to read the rest of this and to give you my thoughts on it. Thank you for listening.